forks and 2 knives, that means you start with the outermost fork and the outermost knife. That's usually for the appetizer or the starter course. When you're done with the course, you place the fork and the knife at a 4 to 5 o'clock angle. That means you're done. If you're not done yet, you can have it in this position or in that position. That indicates that you're not finished eating yet. Do not put the used silverware back on the tablecloth or the table, and simply put it on the plate so it can be taken away. Trust me, your host thought about it when they put together the place setting, and everything has a reason. In restaurants in the US, you often encounter 2 forks on the left and 1 knife on the right. In that case, use the outermost fork on the left and the knife on the right to eat your starter course, and then request a new knife, whether it's a steak knife or a regular knife, for your main course. 3. Now it's time to serve the food. Most informal dinners are family style, meaning there are bowls or platters where food is served from. For formal dinners, courses are usually plated, but we talk about the intricacies of that in our formal dining etiquette video here. With bowls and anything at a table, the cardinal rule is don't reach over anybody else and don't touch them. To start, pass the roll around the table from the left to the right. When you get the bowl, you hold it and you serve yourself. Then you pass it on to your neighbor on the right. Always use the serving utensils and never your silverware that's on your place setting. Of course, if the host or hostess have a different idea, go with what they do. If you'd like seconds later on, or if you want salt, simply ask for it and don't reach it unless it's right in front of you. If someone asks you for either salt or pepper, always pass both things together. When you serve yourself, be reasonable. You can count how many people are at the table, and everyone wants something, so don't pile it up on your plate. You never want to take more than your fair share, and keep in mind there will likely be seconds. Always be open-minded about the food being served. Even if you think you don't like something, the host likely put a lot of effort into the meal, and you should always at least try it. Just put a little bit on your plate and try. If you suffer from severe food allergies, you should tell the host before the dinner is cooked so they can make the proper arrangements. 4. Finally, it's time to eat. You should only start eating when everyone else has been served and the host or hostess starts to take their fork and take the lead. It's considered very impolite and sometimes even rude to just dig in to your plate of food while the others are still empty-handed. When it comes to eating with silver, there are basically 2 schools of thought. One is the American way and one is the continental way. With American way, you hold the fork in your right hand and you eat that way. If you cut off something, you transfer the fork to your left hand and have the knife in your right hand. When you're done cutting, place the knife on top of the plate or on a knife rest if it's available, and then you transfer your fork from the left to the right again and eat. Because it's back and forth, it's also known as the zigzag method. On the other hand, with the continental method, you hold the fork in the left hand and the knife in the right hand. That way there's no switching up back and forth. Both the American and the continental method are perfectly acceptable. Personally, I prefer the continental version simply because I don't have to switch back and forth, and so I can focus more on the conversation rather than having to pay attention to my plate. Even within the continental school of thought, there are differences in how you put the food to your mouth. Basically, when you hold your fork, you hold it in the left hand more like a pencil. However, when you switch to cutting something, you turn the fork around about 180 degrees. For example, if you cut a piece of meat, you can leave the fork in a cutting position and move it right to your mouth. That way it's curved down. Or you can switch it up and bring the fork to your mouth with it facing up. Both styles are acceptable. When it comes to spoon, basically everything that is served in a bowl or a bouillon cup is supposed to be eaten with a spoon. The key is to be comfortable with whatever method you use. It should always look effortless. Feel free to practice at home until it has really become a part of who you are, so you never have to think about it twice. So the big question is what to do with your elbows. As a general rule, don't put your elbows on your table when you're eating because it's considered to be impolite. Instead, leave your wrists on the table when you're chewing, or if you go with the American method, you can also keep your hand on your lap. Now, in between courses, or if you have a conversation after dinner, it's totally fine to have your elbows on the table. Just make sure that your body language is engaged and not slouching. When eating in company, pace is very important. The goal is to have a great flowing conversation, and because of that, should neither eat too slow nor too fast. Something that I sometimes struggle with is speed. I eat way too fast. So company really helps me to slow down and engage in conversation. That way I can enjoy the food and the company at the same time. A good indicator are always the people around you or your host or hostess, so you're neither too fast or too slow. As a general rule, cut up the pieces of food as you eat them. Don't cut up everything before and then eat it piece by piece. That's only something you would do for a little child, not for a grown person. Also, take small bites and chew them and swallow them completely before you take the next bite. Always eat with your mouth closed and avoid making any chewing noises. Years ago, I used to eat a lot more salt than I do now, so I always made assumptions about the food and heavily salted it before I tried it. Don't be that guy. Why? If a hiring manager sees that you salt your food before you try it, they're led to believe that you make assumptions rather than make decisions based on fact, and they're less likely to give you the job. Even in a personal setting, it can be disrespectful to just salt your food without having tried it in the first place. Of course, if you've tried a food and it's under-seasoned to your taste, ask for salt and pepper, and it should be better. Now is also a great time to compliment the host or hostess on their table arrangements, their food, maybe the choice of their wine, or something that you genuinely like. Make sure you're sincere, because otherwise people will notice. If someone asks you a question while you're still chewing, finish chewing and then answer. Likewise, don't ask others questions while they're still chewing, because it may put them in the awkward situation where they still have to chew for 10-15 seconds. That creates awkward pauses. If bread is served with dinner, it's likely served in a basket or in a bowl, and you pass it around just like any other serving bowl, from the left to the right. If you get the bowl, you take a piece of bread, you put it on your plate, and you pass it on or put it back in the spot. Most of the time, butter is served with bread. Put some butter on your plate with a butter knife that is clean. Never use a knife or a piece of silverware that has been used. Depending on the country you're in, eating bread can also be different. In the US, most people will butter their entire bread, then pick it up by hand and take a bite and put the bread back. In Germany, for example, that would be a faux pas. Instead, you would take a piece of bread, break it off by hand, put a little piece of butter from your plate onto the bread, eat it, and then continue later on with breaking the bread, buttering it, and then eating it. So if you travel abroad, be aware of the cultural differences and try to be cognizant of them and respect them.
Девушки такие девушки. Мы можем страдать просто так, ни почему. Но какая пустота ни была бы у нас в душе, важно уметь радовать себя.
If you end up with excess food in your mouth, use a napkin or a wrap to wipe it off right away. Make sure to always use just one side of the napkin and stick with it, otherwise you'll stain your clothes. If something gets stuck in your teeth, don't just sit there, use a toothpick, or try to wipe it off while other people aren't there. The worst thing you can do is hold up your hand and try to get rid of it using your finger and maybe make awkward noises. Instead, excuse yourself, go to the restroom, make yourself look presentable, maybe use a toothpick if one is available. For example, in Austria, you find toothpicks even at the finest restaurants, versus in Germany, toothpicks are not something you'll commonly encounter on a table. If you need to use a toothpick, it's always safer not to do so in public or at the table. So how should you excuse yourself? If you must leave because you're expecting an urgent call or you have to go to a restroom, simply say, "Excuse myself, I'll be right back." Please don't explain why you have to leave or what the reason is, or that you just had 4 beer earlier and that you really have to pee. That's just not an appropriate conversation at the time. So while getting up from your chair, fold your napkin and place it to the left on your plate or on the chair. No, it doesn't have to be folded like before, just make sure it looks neat. Also, push your chair back in. My wife always gets annoyed with me if I don't put my chair back. If you ever have to leave the table, make sure to keep it short, 5 minutes max. Otherwise, it's very rude and impolite to stay away for longer than that. Now, all that being said, here are some things you should never do.
Ну я одиночка, да.
Never use your fingers to eat food with a plate, or especially
Вот это есть на самом
push
деле.
your last bit of food onto the fork. Instead, use a knife. I see a lot of people making that mistake, but it's completely unnecessary because you have all the utensils at your disposal. Likewise, never lick your fingers or your fork.
Ну да, ну вот этого не ну да. Хорошие методы. Конверсиации. Конверсиации. Ну вот это, да. Чё? Что ли я? Что это такое? Вот и ты знаешь. Эй, come on, what is it? Уже.